Hey students, let's talk about social stratification in this video lesson together. We've mentioned social stratification before in previous units in the video that you've just watched. And social stratification is going to be a recurring theme. We've already talked about it in previous weeks, just briefly, but definitely it's going to begin to be not only a recurring thing, but a dominant theme in the topics that we visit in geography class between now and the end of the semester. So regarding urbanization, social stratification becomes very, very evident on the cultural landscape. So we have, with urbanization, city building, and in a video that you're going to watch sometime after this one, you're going to take a tour, so to speak, of the different kinds of city organizations and the city plans that are dominant from one culture to the next, from one continent to the next, really. But within each of those, please make note of the different ways in which the city is built into sectors, so to speak. Not all of them have things called sectors, but there are different zones, there's different regions, there's different ways of organizing the place, so that different people within or among different categories of social inequality are sort of segregated and separated from each other within the urban landscape. So social stratification refers to differing levels of inequality among the different categories of people that exist in a society. So when societies were smaller or had different, other than agricultural subsistence strategies, you didn't see a whole lot, not vast differences in social stratification like you do with agriculture. Agriculture creates a particular dynamic within social stratification that's based on ownership of the key money-making things in society. And early on in the early agricultural revolutions, having land and having the ability to access a quick and a free or cheap labor force to actually produce food on that land and then distribute food and sell it for you at a profit, that greatly affected the social stratification between wealth and poverty in society. Okay? So one of the ways you can be in different categories in a social stratification system is based on wealth or poverty. There's lots of different ways that social stratification filters out. For instance, wealth and poverty is way too simplistic. It's just like the theme that we can use to analyze social stratification to a certain extent. So for instance, people traditionally, and when I say traditional, I mean like throughout history, traditionally people who had wealth were owners of land and owners of the resources that were needed to farm and participate in agriculture effectively. And so those folks were able to control a great deal of the economic dynamic within the particular functional region where they existed. And so the city was the central marketplace, and you will see a central business district in most of the city organization models that you are going to learn about in a video that's coming up. So that central business district early on was the place where the market existed, where you would sell your surplus. And if you focused on cattle and I focused on sweet potatoes and somebody else focused on citrus, whatever it was, you would come together in a centralized market. People from the hinterlands in the places where these things were produced would travel there to sell their excess goods for profit. They intentionally produced excess so that they could have profit. And so this created a hierarchy of urban sectors within the city planning or the city development models that you're going to see. And so you can look at wealth and poverty here as the owners of the resources, the managers of those owners of the resources, the lower level supervisors, within the workforce, and the boots on the ground folks are typically the lower ranking workers or even slaves. Slavery became a dominant way for agriculture to be to be successful in the early millennia, whether slaves were purchased, and not only Africans were purchased in slave trades over the millennia, but usually through conquest. When you had early rulers have military conquest, they would take the enemy, the surviving people, women and children, and the soldiers of the people who were conquered, and enslave them, and focus on increasing the empire or increasing wealth. And so there can be a wide variety of ways that you look at wealth versus poverty in a social stratification system. And I have some other examples on the board behind me of how social stratification gets more complicated than this. It's not just about wealth and poverty, but if you put sex and gender on top of that, if you superimpose that on top of your access to money resources, if you take somebody who's young or who's old, that's another way. I don't have other human development index issues up here, such as education level. But in some cases, if sex and gender are the dominant parts of your inequality, your social identity, and inequality is based on what sex category you fall into, in some cases, education is not available to women, for instance, in lots of countries around the world. So education is one of those human development index issues that we've visited in the past and will continue to visit. And often education is tied to your ability to be wealthy or to be able to acquire some kind of wealth for yourself and your offspring in your lifespan and theirs. So there's lots of different ways that inequality happens in a society. We're going to look at it in the urban landscape in the case of this particular unit in Chapter 9. And in future units, we will look at age, we will look at sex and gender, we will look at racial and ethnic lines for the ways that inequality is filtered out, so to speak, in a society. We're going to look at maps where people are plotted based on their political affiliation. We're going to look at maps where people are plotted based on youth and elderhood within a city landscape. We're going to look at the way that geographers can interpret the cultural landscape, and business leaders can use that information to know how to market certain products and services. Urban planners can use that information to know what kind of activities and what kind of social resources that the government supplies, are going to be part of that, because cities, one of the major things with cities is that it is a governmental entity, or at least that's one of the components of the definition of a city, is having some sort of governance body to maintain order and to maintain the structure of cities. And so they're in charge of urban planning, and they can take in taxes and use those tax dollars for certain goods and services in an area that people in a democracy vote to be used, vote for those tax dollars to be used for. And so social stratification and money is a big thing to look at. Access to education is a big thing to look at as in terms of social stratification in our modern world. But remember, early on, with just agriculture being the impetus for why these cities that we're going to look at were established in the first place, this was about ownership, your relationship to the land, to the seeds, to the plants, to the implements that were necessary, the livestock maybe that helped you with harvest and helped you with planting. Your relationship to those, were you an owner? Did you use somebody else's for their profit and they paid you? Did you have nothing? Did you have no relationship to it? And so that would affect your position within that hierarchy of inequality within that society. And with city plans, you can really begin to look at the way and see, in other words, like literally, not just look at it like we were considering it in this video when I'm talking to you about it, but you're going to, in the video on the city models, you're actually going to look at plots of how these cities are laid out, and you should look at these things with a critical eye. Where are the money centers, so to speak? And can you tell where wealth would exist compared to poverty existing, compared to heavy business and industry compared to light shopping and leisure and these kinds of things, all within our urban and cultural landscape. So I'll see you in another video. Thank you.